Hello, welcome to Makeup and Monarchies. I'm Tiffany. I am a makeup artist, cosmetologist, and a lover of medieval, middle-age England, Scotland. Here if you're new here, what we do, or what I do, is I put my makeup on and I talk about a certain person, place, or thing, event in the Middle Ages and medieval up until who knows. My flyaways. That's cute. So this week we're talking Richard III. This was a difficult episode for me to do, mainly because it is filled with drama and unnecessary garbage. So we're going to get right into it. Everything I've used is listed down below. With that being said, let's get into it. Hello. So Richard III was born on October 2nd of 1452 at Fotheringay Castle in Northamptonshire. He was the youngest child of Richard and Cecily Neville to survive infancy. He was, I believe, the 11th of 12 that the two of them had. His father was, don't mind my... I did an awful job on my tan last night. Apologies. Don't make fun of me. It is what it is. We're moving on. His father was the leader of the Yorkist army and was deeply involved in the ongoing War of the Roses. First, I'm starting with my Radiance Concealer just to cover everything. Every time I use my U-tan and tone, I always get it just goes into where I have my spots. Richard had scoliosis, but he did not have a hunchback as Shakespeare claims. When Richard was 7 years old, he went to live with his brother George, along with his brother George. They went to live with their aunt Anne Neville while their father escaped the country. You're just going in with my Paint Pot by MAC and Painterly on my eyelids. Per usual, I really want to get the Vive eye wands and try that as a eyeshadow primer. Also, my cat is being out of control today, so if you see his ginger ass pop up, that's why. The following year, Richard's father and older brother Edmund were killed on December 30th of 1460, and Richard and George were sent to the Low Countries in Europe. Most likely it would have been the Netherlands they went to. They came back after the Yorkists defeated the Lancastrians at the Battle of Towton. And their older brother, Edward, was now King Edward IV of England. Richard became the Duke of Gloucester and was made Knight of the Altar and Knight of the Bath at his brother's coronation. In 1464, when he was 11, Edward appointed Richard the sole commissioner of array, and at 17, he had an independent command. During his childhood, Richard spent a lot of time at Warwick Castle under the care of his cousin, Richard Neville, the 16th Earl of Warwick, also known as the Kingmaker. I like to call him the Bastard, because if you're new here, I can't stand that mother. The years he spent with Warwick at Warwick Castle was either 1461 to 1465 or 1465 to 1468. He trained there to be a knight and probably spent time with Warwick's daughter Anne. There is a thought or a theory that Warwick was planning on making a match between Anne and Richard, or Richard and Isabel, his older daughter. Over time, the relationship between Edward and Warwick became strained, and Edward did not agree to a match between his brother and one of Warwick's daughters. This was probably one of the things that set Warwick off and ended up making him join forces with Edward and Richard's middle brother, George. Then they ended up revolting against the king. I do talk about this in my War of the Roses video. I talk about this in quite a few things. So just head back into, you can look in the playlist, my England playlist, and it'll be in there. Oh, like, I think Anne, well, yeah, it'll be in Anne and Isabel's video, episode 2. George married Warwick's oldest daughter, Isabel, in Calais. It's rumored that at this time, Richard and Anne were having an affair. I'm not sure how much I believe that, but at the time it was the tea. So they were young. They weren't even 20 yet. Richard and Edward had to escape England and went to Burgundy to seek refuge after Warwick and George invaded and created an uprising against Edward. Their sister had married Charles the Bold, and their safety was secure there. They spent some time of their exile in Bruges with the Burgundian ambassador to Edward's court. In March of 1471, they set sail for England and were refused entry in Hull, but then went north to York, and they were let in there. Edward regained the support of his brother George and was now trying to regain the crown through war. Richard seems to be his principal lieutenant because a lot of the earliest support came from Richard's kin. He may have led this army at the Battle of Barnet. This is believed to be his personal household. This is believed because his personal household took losses, and that shows that he was in the thick of it. It is now clear about holding Edward's lead at Tewkesbury because Richard was constable 2 days later and sat next to John Howard at the trial and sentencing of captured leading Lancastrians after the that were captured after the battle. It looks like it was around this time that Richard fathered 2 illegitimate children, both of whom he acknowledged. There was John of Gloucester and Catherine Plantagenet. Catherine's mother may be, I think it was Catherine Haut or Haut, Haut, I believe, but nothing that is concrete evidence. After Tewkesbury, George was being a dick again and became guardian of his sister-in-law, Anne Neville. So for more information on this, I'm going to kind of like skip over this a little bit. You can check out my video about the Neville sisters. I can link that down below. That too will be in the England playlist. So George basically hid Anne away, and the tales say that Richard found her and brought her to St. Martin's or Martin's Le Grand for the church for sanctuary to kind of like save her. According to a letter from John Paston, as of February 1472, marriage negotiations were underway for Richard and Anne. George was bullshit about this because that meant because he wouldn't get both halves of the inheritance. Richard gave up nearly everything Anne would have received except for the Neville estates of Penrith, Sheriff Hutton, and Middleham, where Anne and Richard would use this as their marital household. The couple received papal dispensation, and it was dated for April 22nd of 1472. They married shortly after. Under his brother's reign, Richard was many things. In the north, he was the dominant magnate until his brother's death in 1483. He was highly regarded and held significant authors in the region. This also meant he spent a lot of time delegating with Scotland in the early 1470s. So I was going to do like a smoky eye today. I don't know why I get like freaked out about that, but we're going dark, I guess, today. I haven't done that in a while. I am going to do like a heavier waterline liner today. Maybe we'll go a little on the grungy goth side. I don't know. We'll see how this plays out. So I'm just going to like lightly tap this in and then blend lightly with my brush. Now you'll notice I'm keeping my eye open just so I can see where that line is falling. And I'm just going to scoot this in a little bit more. I like when I have like a little bit of brightness in this area. So I probably could scoot that in a little bit more in here. See right here. I think this is Soot. Richard brought his mother-in-law, Anne Beauchamp, to live with him and Anne at Middleham. She had been in sanctuary since the death of her husband, Warwick, after the Battle of Tewkesbury. Later that year, because of the terms of the 1473 Act of Resumption, George lost some of the property that he held, and he was pissed. Edward had planned to act as a stifler between them, stifler, early 1474 after Parliament assembled. Edward was trying to get them to get along, so he thought they would all be happier if the Countess was naturally dead. Basically, they said she was dead when she really wasn't, just to kind of alleviate the pressure of the money and the inheritance. Remember too, at this time, Edward and Richard are 10 years apart. Dad's gone. Edward is the bigger brother, basically becomes a father figure to Richard. So he really looked up to him. I mean, and Edward was humongous. He was 6'2", 6'4", in that vicinity. So for the time, he was a big guy. More marriage validity drama ensued, and Richard ended up getting rewarded with all of the Neville lands in the north. George again lost his mind and was falling out with his brothers, or his brother, the king, yet again. It was after the death of his wife, Isabel, in 1477 that he went off the deep end and got himself executed. In 1475, an impending war with France was blooming, and it was squashed, and Richard acted as his brother's witness at French court. He didn't agree with his brother on not going to war with France, since his brother benefited both politically and financially from agreeing to a truce. War with Scotland was looming come 1480. So I'm just going to go, that line's pretty heavy, so I'm just going to go back through with, oh, see? Then you can kind of like go back and layer the blend out with your previous brushes. I want to go in and just kind of stipple this in a little bit. Oh, I went in far. Richard was appointed Lieutenant General of the North. Louis XI of France was attempting a military alliance with Scotland, the Old Alliance. Richard summoned help against the border raids, and together with the Earl of Northumberland, he called for counter raids. War was officially declared in November, and Richard was given £10,000 in wages. Edward didn't show to lead the English army. Richard witnessed the treaty made with Alexander, Duke of Albany, who was the younger brother to James III of Scotland. I just did a video on James II last week. So you can go watch that. That would be this James's dad. Gonna blend. Richard and the King's men attacked Berwick upon Tweed from Scotland, and this was the last time the royal borough of Berwick changed hands between the two countries. I'm gonna try and do my liner and my eyeliner, and I'm gonna try and read this. See how it goes. Okay. On April 9th of 1483, the King Edward IV died unexpectedly, and Richard was left named Lord Protector of the now Edward V. Richard was in Yorkshire at the time of his brother's death, so he left for London. Here comes the soap opera. I feel like the next amount of time is just fucking ridiculous. Just everything's ridiculous. Also, side note, I don't hate Richard. I'm saying that now. I don't hate him. I actually thoroughly enjoy him. I had a hard time with this one just because there's a lot of information. I'm trying to be as brief as I possibly can. I'm just saying. It was agreed that Richard and the Duke of Buckingham would meet with Anthony Woodville, the now Dowager Queen's brother, in Northampton. Now, Anthony was at Ludlow with Edward, basically raising him to be a king. I have to pause. We're going to talk. So Anthony was bringing little Edward to London, and they were armed with 2,000 men. This was requested by Elizabeth. I personally do not think she did that or requested that because she thought that Edward was going to be harmed by anybody or by Richard. I think she did it to protect him and to make sure he got to London unscathed. I know that Richard and Elizabeth didn't really get along. I don't think they hated each other, but I don't think they got along, like they weren't chummy. Anywho, Anthony had Edward sent south to Stony Stratford. Richard had Anthony arrested, as well as his nephew Richard Grey, who was Elizabeth's son from her first marriage. They were taken to Pontefract Castle and were executed on June 25th on the charge of treason against Richard as Lord Protector. Bullshit. 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 After the arrest of Anthony and Richard Grey, Richard and Duke of Buckingham went to Edward and told him there was a plot to deny Richard his Lord Protector role, and these people had been dealt with. Richard then brought Edward to London. Hold on, I gotta do this. This is crazy. Richard then brought Edward to London, to the Tower of London, where Richard then brought Edward to London and first had him in the bishop's apartments, but moved him to the Tower of London, where kings usually waited for their coronation within the royal apartments. And Richard moved into Crosby Hall. Now, we all, or a lot of us, know the Tower of London as a prison. At this time, it was not. People were held there, but it wasn't what it became under Henry VIII. The Tower of London was still a royal residence. I actually did an episode on the Tower of London. Go take a look at that. It is a great place. I've been there. I love it there. It's absolutely stunning. So for him to put Edward V in the tower wasn't unheard of. I don't think it was looked down upon. I don't think anybody thought something was going to happen. It's just where they all went. Even the queens went there to wait out their confinement when they were going to have the babies. So for him to put little Edward there wouldn't have been blinked at. Once Dowager Queen Elizabeth heard about her brother's arrest, she then went into sanctuary again at Westminster Abbey. She brought her only remaining son from her first marriage, Thomas Grey, her 5 daughters with Edward IV, and their youngest son, Richard of Shrewsbury. During a council meeting on June 13th at the Tower of London, Richard accused Lord Hastings of conspiring with the Woodvilles against him. Odd, because Hastings wasn't, as far as I know, as far as I've read, Hastings was not a big fan of the Woodvilles. He also accused his brother's mistress, Jane Shore, as a go-between. It had been rumored also that Jane was involved with Thomas Grey and Hastings. At this point, there are things that are written by Thomas More about this whole time period, situation. I'm not discussing it because at the time this is going on, he was only little. He was 5 or 6. And was nowhere near the inner dealings of court. So to me, it's what he has said about this is a moot point, because I think he just did it to appease the Tudors. So Richard had Hastings executed for treason and took his wife, Catherine, under protection. On June 16th, Elizabeth agreed to hand over her youngest son, Richard, to the Archbishop of Canterbury so he could take him to the Tower of London and could attend his brother's coronation. That it was still planned that the coronation was going to happen on June 22nd. Originally, Elizabeth was planning for it to happen on May the 4th, but that did not. Richard put a stop to that and said we didn't need to rush it. So this June 22nd date is the date he said that Edward would be crowned. Supposedly, Richard was told by Bishop Robert Stillington that his brother's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid due to Edward's previous marriage to Eleanor Butler. This made the children between Edward and Elizabeth illegitimate. On June 22nd, there was a sermon that was preached outside of Old St. Paul's that declared Edward IV's children bastards and that Richard was now the rightful king. This caused the citizens of London to draw up a petition asking Richard to take the throne. The bastard accepted on June 26th and then crowned on July 6th at Westminster Abbey alongside his wife, Anne Neville. Their coronation was followed by a royal progress through the country. The ultimate whodunit in the history of the world is going to ensue, and still to this day, we don't know. Nobody knows. There's theories, there's discussions, there's some evidence, but nothing concrete. As of the fall of 1483, rumors started circulating that Richard had killed the boys, and personally, I don't think Richard did it. I really don't. I don't think if the boys were illegitimate, what's the purpose? I don't, that's my personal opinion. A love letter to Matt Lewis. I'm gonna agree. So after all of this shit happens, the Duke of Buckingham, who had been an ally of Richard's for so long, decided to lead a conspiracy against Richard. He basically said anyone that was following Richard was only doing so because they were loyal to his brother Edward. There is a possibility that this was intended to depose Edward to depose Richard and put Edward V back on the throne. But by then the rumors of the boy's death were circulating, so that was out. Buckingham then was proposing to put Henry Tudor on the throne if he came back from exile in Brittany. He was only going along with a plan that had already been hatched between the Woodvilles and the Beauforts to marry Henry and Elizabeth of York. So Buckingham raised a huge force from his estates in Wales and the Marches. Henry was bound for England, but a storm forced the ships to return to Brittany or Normandy. The same storm made Buckingham's troops desert him. When Richard's force came against them, Buckingham tried to hide, but it was turned over to Richard, and he was convicted of treason and was beheaded in Salisbury. So come March 1st of 1484, Richard had his nieces brought out of sanctuary at Westminster Abbey to come live at court. He publicly swore an oath that the girls wouldn't be harmed or molested and that they wouldn't be put in the Tower or any other prison. He promised to give them marriage portions and to marry them to gentlemen born. He gave Elizabeth 700 marks a year. Elizabeth was a smart woman, so I think there's more. I think there's more here than we think. I don't think he killed the boys, and I think Elizabeth knew that too. I just don't. This whole situation does not add up. Why would you hand over your girls if you believe that your brother-in-law killed your sons? It just doesn't make sense. Richard and Anne were on their way to visit their son at Middlehelm Castle while they were in Nottingham. The young prince, Edward, died suddenly. He was only under 10 years old, and his birth year has been given the birth year for him has been given either 1473 or 1476. So at this time, he's still young, he's still little, and it seems he had a short illness. Richard is now left with no heirs and a wife who was 28 and probably not going to have any other children. Rumors started to spread that Richard was going to marry his niece Elizabeth, but it seems very unlikely that was. Anne began to fall extremely ill after the death of their son. On March 16th of 1485, Anne dies at Westminster of tuberculosis. At the time, tuberculosis was called consumption. The rumor mill started again, saying that Richard poisoned her or that it was an omen from his fall from grace. Nevertheless, he was devastated from losing Anne and was openly crying at her funeral. So the Henry Tudor invasion comes up again, and this time it is really happening. Richard's army outnumbered Henry's by 3,000. I'll link a really, really, really great video that Matt Lewis did about the battle. I'm not going to go into in depth about the positioning and all that stuff and the locations. That video does a superb job of it. So I'd rather just link it. Go watch that if you're interested. It is really good. The battle began early morning on August 22nd at Bosworth Field. So the battle itself probably lasted only 2 hours. It said that Richard wanted to end this quickly by striking Henry Tudor. So with the crown on his head, he continued to fight until he was knocked from his horse and was killed. Oh, I didn't finish this. I ran out of space on my phone. Henry Tudor was declared king, and Richard's naked body was carried to Leicester tied to a horse. He was buried in the choir of the Grey Friars Church. So he was never reburied, and the tomb eventually disappeared. Let's now fast forward to 2012. Richard III Society announced that they were going to look for his remains. The search was managed by Philippa Langley, and she's part of the Richard III Society. And it was also going to be, and Jack's with us, and the University of Leicester Archaeological Services were going to be part of this dig. The diggers found the Grey Friars by September 5th, and not too long after that, a human skeleton was found under the church's choir. On September 12th, it was announced that the skeleton might be Richard's. A few things that led them to that conclusion were the location, the body was an adult male, the spine had severe scoliosis, and numerous injuries. Again, I'm going to link a wonderful video of a lecture from a woman who was on the dig and part of this whole thing. It's really interesting. And the woman that's giving the lecture is a treat to listen to. She's really good. And she discusses the mitochondrial DNA and how they went about finding if it was actually him. On February 4th of 2013, it was confirmed that the skeletal remains were Richard. And on March 22nd of 2015, Richard got a religious reburial at Leicester Cathedral, where he now rests for eternity. I am going to go do my brows and my mascara and my hair, and then I will be back for fun facts.
I'm back. So this week's fun facts. Richard was the only king to die in battle since 1066, so almost 1,000 years, and only one king. It's said he's under 5 feet tall, or he was under 5 feet tall. I don't know about that, but his ancestors include almost everybody on the planet. Also Benedict Cumberbatch, who spoke at his funeral. My last one is his body was actually under a current car park, and there was an R on the parking spot that his body was under. How strange and how funny the world works. I just wanted to tell you that I used the Rosa Lip Dew from Vive today with the lip liner Velvet Sands. Sand, I don't know if it's plural. Let's see. Is it plural? It is plural. That is all for today. Everything that I use is going to be listed down below. I'll list those, or I'll link those videos that I talked about, and you can go watch that. I will tell you, this was a hard thing for me to do. I don't know why it was so hard. I think because it's frustrating. Because Richard was loyal to his brother his entire life, and then all this shit happens. That's just so crazy. And I think it's, people whispering in ears, and sometimes people being naive and believing it. Or I actually, after doing this, I'm going to lay a lot of the blame on everything that happened in his later years on Robert Stillington. Robert worked with his brother George when he was going against their older brother Edward. So there's more on that, but I'll probably get into it in George's episode. I just find it sad, and I think it's just for you to be so loyal to your sibling, and then once they die, completely, I don't know, man. Anyways, that's it for this week. Next week, we're starting a series, and I'm already working on it. We're going to start with Henry VIII, which will be in 2 episodes because there's way too much shit to go over. So, that's it for this week. I hope you have a good one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.